All right, so we're going to get started. And before we continue, I'd love to just kind of talk about competencies and give a little bit of a time if you had any questions, any further questions on core, role, how the pipeline goes up, the competencies, any of that. Any questions? Yep. Mm. Yeah, so there's definitely, I mean, there's that saying out there when you try to figure out who to hire, competency, character, or chemistry, right? And you're like, okay, those are three factors that you need to be aware of. Our understanding or our use of the word competency is the idea that, hey, in order to drive, in order to get your license, you need to display a level of competency, right? A proficiency in that. So we're not necessarily, it's not something different than character in the sense. So you can actually have a competency that is, let's say here, Christian character. So that could be a competency that then within the competency you can display a low level of proficiency or a high level of proficiency. So thank you for that clarification. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, definitely. So with here in going from volunteer leader, coach, ministry director, senior leader, hey, here's a good example. All right, let's talk about vision. All right, let's talk about the idea of the competency called vision. Right, if you're a senior leader, if you're a senior minister, what do you need to be able to do in regards to vision? Like, what does proficiency look like in the vision competency at the senior leader level? Preaching, yeah, that's maybe a way that you can communicate your vision, right? But what, pardon me? Clarity, yeah, definitely. So there has to be a level of, hey, the senior minister needs to be able to maybe create a clear vision, right? So the senior leader has to create that vision, right, clearly, and clearly they need to communicate it well, right? So if a senior leader, if that's, let's say that's what a senior leader needs to be able to do in relation to vision, what does a ministry director need to be able to do? What does proficiency look like with vision? Does the ministry director need to, do they have to also create vision? Alignment, yeah, exactly, right? You don't want all your ministry areas to have competing visions to the church's overall vision, right? It needs to be aligned well, right? So there's that vision that they need to create and communicate really well, and the ministry director needs to be able to take that vision and they need to be able to contextualize it well. And then what about leaders, right? So if we go like coach, this idea of, hey, I'm going to be leading a team. What do you want them, what does proficiency look like in the vision competency? Yeah, so the ministry director is leading a department, so they probably have to do the contextualization. This person they're leading a group of individuals. They're not leading the ministry. Yes. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, definitely. So I would agree in the sense of probably more along the lines of the articulation, right? They need to be able to articulate it well. Maybe if they are doing the contextualization, they're leaning probably on the ones above them to do that, to help with, but they're articulating. So then at the volunteer level, what would you want a volunteer to do in regards to the vision of the church? To implement? Yeah, kind of. They're all implementing it in one sense, right? Can all your, yes. Yes. Yeah, so they need to know the vision, right? Totally, right? So and then that's where you have individuals in the pew, they should be aware of the vision, right? And then if the volunteers, maybe would you want them to be able to say the vision? If not say it, at least know the gist of it, right? And then to be able to keep on moving up. Yes, completely. So do you see how the competencies, if you have a competency called vision, do you see how it accordions up? So it's vision at every level, but it's kind of like it accordions, right? So at every level, vision looks different at this level, at this level, at this level, at this level, but you can move someone up. So this is where it becomes really incredibly useful, right? There's a survey. Are you familiar with the Gallup organization? They do Gallup polls, surveys. They did the StrengthsFinder assessment, is a fantastic one, kind of self-gifts and all that. But they have this thing called the Q12, and it's called an engagement survey, and it's something that they use to help workplaces understand how engaged individuals are, right? And I'm sure we've all been in engaged environments, right? And if you're engaged, it's kind of like I need to know this. I'm paying attention. I'm going to take things away. Even in, you don't even need to, no one even needs to tell you, you need to write things down. If you're engaged, you're fully in, right? So for example, one of the questions they asked is, do you have a friend at work? It's a simple question, but if you think back to maybe school or other places where you've worked, maybe it's today, right? And you didn't like anyone you were working with. Do you think you'd be engaged in the work? Maybe you didn't really like what you were doing, but if you had a friend that you could talk to, that would affect engagement, right? So that's just one simple example. 3 to 4 out of those 12 questions were all about development. And basically what that meant is the more an individual was developed, or someone talked to them about their development, the more engaged they would be at work. And this is important, because the last thing that we want are hirelings. We don't really want our volunteers and our leaders to be like, oh yeah, I'm just putting my time in because otherwise I'm going to be, God is going to smite me, or I don't want to burn up, or, we don't want that, right? That's not a reason to serve, right? We're serving. I mean, Jesus said, I've come not to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. And oftentimes when I'll help my church, or I'll preach a sermon on serving, and especially on that passage, I'll talk about the connection that it has, where it's like, perhaps the more we serve, because Jesus said, I've come not to be served, but to serve, what happens, is there a connection where if we are serving, we are actually living like Christ? It's an opportunity for God to mold us, to shape us, to transform us, because we are doing what Jesus came on to earth to do. Right? So I'll share kind of a culture like that instead of saying, oh, you should serve because I told you so. Or you should serve because it's paying your dues. Right? I mean, that's not envisioning. Right? So when you look at this idea of, of serving and of development, the more an individual is engaged, the more they're going to feel like a member, the more they're going to feel like an owner, the more they're going to just want to give and be a part of this all. Right? So in light of all that, the reason we talk about development, the reason we talk about this, let's say you have, who's the senior minister here? All right, so let's say you're talking to, if you have an assistant pastor, or if you have a youth pastor, or if you have someone else on your team, for example, right, someone else who's being paid. What would it look like if your role, right, if they're at the ministry director level, you're at the senior leader level, and what would it look like if they're brand new, maybe a couple of years in ministry, and they don't really know how to create vision, right? You know how to create vision as a senior minister. I mean, you're the lead, you're the senior pastor. You need to own. I mean, you're the one ultimately responsible for this. So what would it look like if you had the conversations with your ministry, with your assistant pastors, and said, hey, here's a brand new ministry. Why don't you help me create the vision for this? Let me help you learn what it means to listen to the congregation, to pray for this. Do you understand that the development conversation that can happen? Right? And the idea of identifying what are the common competencies, what are the core competencies that are every single level, right? If it's like vision, right? Vision, right? And maybe it's discipleship, right? And it accordions up. So that's the idea of the core competencies, just explained in a different way, and how they can work together. Do you see the potential that something like this has when it's clarified that way? All right. Any other questions? All right. So part of understanding core competencies and understanding the power of this and actually leveraging it is determining what your definition for each of these levels are. right? Because we went highly generic, right? We went like volunteer leader, coach, ministry director, senior leader, right? And if you're under 500 individuals, more or less, oftentimes this coach level isn't really applicable. It's not something, it's too much structure. So because oftentimes you may have someone who's overseeing the kids' ministry and they're the one overseeing leaders of others, right? And then it's not always needed. But if you look at page 11, you can actually see here, there are these 5 levels, right? Volunteer, leader, coach, ministry director, and senior leader. And I would love for you to actually take a moment, think about all the ministries in your church, and write out the areas, right? Write out the areas that are within each category. So for example, if you write volunteer down here, you would think, okay, what is a volunteer level position in my church? Greeter, maybe it's someone who's in charge, so someone who does the coffee, just someone who's a volunteer, they're leading themselves. And then on the next level, you write leader, and you're like, what positions are there in our church where someone is actually leading other people, right? Like a small group leader, or maybe it's a person who's leading a Sunday school class with the kids. And then what is a coach? What is a ministry director level senior? So what you want to do is you're just doing an audit as to what positions you currently have. And when you finish that, the goal then would be to say, what should I call these positions? Is volunteer the right term to call all of these positions? So it's, for example, it's the cafe volunteer or the kids volunteer, or maybe you don't like the term volunteer. So maybe it's the cafe member or the kids member or the kids participant, or, it's this language, right? So then on top of that, you're like, okay, is it a growth group leader, or is it a growth group team member, or growth group team leader? Like, what is that common term that you want to use for each of these levels? And this is why it matters. We're not just talking about just a fun little exercise to see what positions we have and coming up with a common term. That's not why we're doing this. The reason we're doing this is because here's the potential of a leadership pipeline. Let's say you have a parent who has a 6th grade daughter, right? And the parent has been serving faithfully in the kids' ministry for 6 years, right? Or 7 years, from kindergarten on up. And it's not that they were really passionate about kids' ministry, but they loved their child and they just wanted to help out. And over the years, the parent went from just doing the Sunday school supplies to then leading a group. And now they're actually here, or they're here. They're actually running the kids' ministry, or running grades 3 to 6, right? They're high capacity volunteer, right? And it's just because they were a parent. Now, what if their child, their daughter, goes to grade 7 and now is in student ministry or in high school, and the parent says, you know what? It's not that I really loved kids ministry. I just love being there for my kid. So I want to help out now in the student ministry, right? So then whoever's over the kids ministry is crying, right? Because their top leader is leaving. But you understand, you don't want to hold them. I mean, it's not like you're paying them, right? I mean, it's not, you don't really, it's just, okay, well, you're serving. I understand you now want to go to the student ministry. So what do we often do when that happens? Well, the volunteer starts right there and says, well, you don't know how to do student ministry. So we're going to put you in right here. But the volunteer in the children's ministry, that person may be at this level or this level. I mean, they may have way more competencies and be such a fantastic leader. Why would we start them here in the student ministry? The beauty of a leadership pipeline and of similar language is saying, hey, let's actually, because that volunteer was operating at this level, now let's move them into this level of a position in the student ministry, because they already display proficiency in the core competencies. They already know how to implement and articulate vision. They already know how to strategize in this way. But the thing that we want to then help them in is the role, which is what? Puberty? How to deal with pre-teenagers? You know what I'm talking about? Like things that are just unique to student ministry, the role base. And that's the power, so then you can actually help volunteers move from one ministry to the other as the Lord is leading them to. Okay, so take some time and work on those levels, do the audit. Todd and I are going to walk around. We're going to roam around, and this is, if you have any specific questions about your context or something that you wanted to wrestle with and talk to us about, just put up your hand, and Todd or I will visit you. So we'll give you about 15 minutes to do this. You typically wouldn't need to. If the first area is that, so most churches would only need 4, right, without the coach. And if they were to add the coach level, it would typically be in the kids ministry or small group ministry first. But most churches, I mean, we've done this with churches of up to 10,000 plus, and they don't need more than 5 because they think they do. But if you look, it's lead self, lead others, lead leaders, lead ministry areas, and lead the church. So at that lead, if someone is leading others, right, you can have multiple levels within the leading others thing. Or if you're, let's say you're leading ministries, you could have, you're leading the junior high kids and leading the senior high kids, or leading this or this. So this is not an org chart. This is not an organizational chart.
It's more of a ministry chart?
Yeah, it's kind of like the ministry, the function of what they're doing, right? So you could have a ministry director that is over other ministry directors, right? Because the department that they're leading is staff. You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's flexible in that way.
Can I ask more in terms of the common thread?
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at coaching, we're in children's ministry,
Yeah, okay.
so you've got your members and they become leaders, and you have your team lead. But how do you identify? Would you have a ministry leader and then team leaders?
Yeah. So for kids ministry specifically?
Or just generally,
Okay.
at that coaching level, because most of us, I think, at that coaching level, don't generally have.
Yeah, we don't.
But we want to therefore articulate
Yeah.
that desire
Yeah.
to equip and invest.
Yeah. So typically, like, let's say in a kids ministry, I mean, they're a great example because they're always the most complicated ones. Let's do this. So you have at the volunteer level, let's say someone who's preparing equipment or Sunday school, crafts or printing things off, right? Hopefully the staff member's not doing that, right? So you have the volunteers, and they're leading themselves. They're not leading other people, right? They're just leading themselves. In other words, they're getting there on time. They have a job and they're getting it done, right? So that's the leading others. Leading self. And then leading others would be, let's say, your classroom teachers, right? Because they're leading other people. They're leading the students, right? So they would lead themselves. They would be, because they're not leading others yet. Yeah, but that's the pool of people that you would want to pull up to lead the classes, right? So lead others, lead self, lead others, and then the lead leaders level would be, let's say you have multiple congregations, right? Or let's say you have 2 services, right? You have a 9 a.m. and an 11 a.m., right? And you have children's ministry in both, right? And you have a lot of leading selves and you have a lot of leading
others, a lot of teachers.
Yeah.
So the role, the time where you would want someone is like, let's say this person is a leading of a leaders. So this person is leading all the Sunday school
Yeah.
teachers, every
Kids
grade's
ministry is where it
teacher.
gets fuzzy for a
For
lot
this,
of
so this
churches, 'cause they
leading
say, I just really
leaders,
or
there's going to be
small.
one person who's going to lead all the teachers at the 9 a.m. service, and another
Yeah.
leading leaders who's going to lead all the teachers at the 11 a.m. service, right? Because now they're not actually leading others; they're leading the leaders who are leading others. And then at the ministry director level, that's when you would have like a children's director or a children's minister who is leading all those volunteers.
Okay.
Now, in a
So,
smaller
in some
context, it's the
cases,
children's minister who is often
somebody would change
leading the
just
teachers,
depending on how they decide to do it.
right?
Sometimes people
Typically.
this is team.
So the children's director is doing this level and this level. But if you add services and add more teachers, that's when you would then add this layer
Some people would
so that the children's minister isn't running around with,
leave it as
her,
volunteer
you know, her,
or give it
yeah.
another somebody wanted to really use service. Like, okay, cool. Technically, that's all the way up through here, but
Yeah, yeah. So that's where
yeah, I mean,
languages,
the hard-
you know, you can
the
call
hard part
them.
is
Coach is just the most generic one we
generally
defined,
speaking, most
right? But
wrestling
coordinator is another one.
either
That some
they
people
don't
use.
want to deal
It could
with
be
the kids
superintendent, right? But then what
Big
would you then
offended.
call someone on top of that?
or whatever, or they just decide,
Director?
No, we feel it's really important in our
Yeah.
in our church, in our ministry. It's one of the the
So then you can call the
why
person
people are
equiper,
gonna show up as
right? You
stick.
could, yeah, right. So I mean, that's where it's
So they say,
highly
hey, we want
contextualized
this,
to the
even if
church's
it's
culture.
technically not,
Because, for
we're gonna
example,
call
we
our-
did this with
the
one
leaders
church
to higher
that had a
level
massive
over.
sports
They're not
ministry.
just gonna be
Like they're
Maybe Robert.
this was in Memphis,
ones that actually
Tennessee, and
train you
the city. I mean, it's
some
not like Australia or Canada where government kind of helps
case,
with social services and with sports and all this stuff.
He was talking
So
about
this church had
all
like
the
6
number of
baseball
kids
fields.
and students that they actually have.
Right.
engaged
Yeah,
in
yeah. It was a massive church,
in
but
the pipeline,
but
you
all
know,
the
within
city's
ministries.
sports
Actually
kind of
have,
went
you
through
know,
the church,
like, hey, we're giving
and
a
they're a
third
real
grader in
blessing to the
class
community,
job.
right?
And
Now,
it's
for that
important
church,
to culture
they
for
couldn't
that.
use the term
That's
coach
awesome.
because they actually had coaches because they had a rec department.
Weird.
Right? So a coach of a sports team is very different than a leader of leaders. Right? A coach is
really
your
is.
lead.
We-
Your
what
coach
we're
is
trying to
actually at
do
this
is
level.
just give
So they couldn't
the
use
vast
their
majority of
context.
the framework to
Couldn't
run off
use
of.
coach.
So you'll see, I mean, you know,
Right.
when we pull this up,
And then there are some ministries where they call their team leader.
on
They call their
14,
leaders directors.
like when we you know,
But you're like,
filmed
you're
all
calling
those
this person a
competencies,
director.
at first, I
Then
had
what do you call
coaches.
people up here?
And it was
So
really
that's why
easy
it's a
in most churches.
beneficial
Most churches
exercise
are
to
less
list out all the
conservative.
positions at
Vast
each level
majority are less
to
conservative.
see if there's any
And so
commonalities
it
and
wasn't
and
correlating, so we
glaring.
ended up collapsing it to
yeah,
4
glaring
and
spots.
squishing
Yes.
those up or down. But all we're trying to do is people won't implement this unless we make it easy and give them steps to take that
Yes.
make it easy, obvious, and strategic. And hopefully we're modeling that for them and in which they'll model it after their church.
Yeah.
He's been on.
I
He's
think.
been on the website.
I mean, it's one thing to get rid of everyone and start from scratch, right? Or to plant a church and your sermon, but I mean that's not reality, right? So
So
what I would say is you
also
have two
here,
tracks, right?
you
The
would
one
have,
track is kind of
a
remediation
full
or
page
catch
on
up,
each one of these,
right?
so
So
you
you
could
have
print off
the
vision
volunteers
and
that are
have
already. I mean, you're going to have
actual
people at
learning
every
objectives
level
and vision
who don't display proficiency
up there
at
as
their
well.
level.
So not just
There needs to be some remediation
like
that happens, right? So
you
with
know,
those
articulate
elders, I mean, some of them might be, your parish
implements the
council, for
vision for
example.
ministry
You're going to
area.
have someone who's a
It's,
sharp
what
finance
does that mean? Well, here's
person,
the
but they're
four steps to that.
characters in the dumps.
When you double
Maybe,
click
right?
that,
Maybe they're
you get
incredibly
into
powerful.
whatever.
So then it's like, okay, at that level, if the
So-
parish council is here, for example,
Yeah.
right, at that level, well, when it comes to discipleship, you want them to exhibit the fruit of the
Either
Spirit,
you have to have
right?
a bold
Or you
dog
want them to
behind it,
know this or that, or to have memorized 10 passages of Scripture, for example. You know, I've hidden thy word in my heart so I might not sin against you, right? So whatever competency looks like, you then say, hey, you're here today.
In part, that's why
Let's
when
over the
Grid,
next year develop it,
when Grid
come up
does
with a development
get
plan,
out
so that you're
of
growing
churches,
in Christ-like,
part of the
so
reason
that
why we
you're,
built it the way we
so
did
that you're growing in
such a
competency.
workflow
And most people, if they're like,
as it is
hey, this is,
LMS.
it's not like I'm over you and I want to make
the
sure
only way
that you
people
get
are gonna
better.
actually
It's more of a, hey, let's grow together. That kind of posture.
they're only gonna give it.
And if it's,
They're
I
not
think
gonna go back and
if it's
stop everything
postured
they
in the
do
right way,
and
okay,
chunk of it,
you're
so we need to
you're
get
not where you're supposed to be. Yeah, but it's like, hey, I'm so convicted that God is calling us to continue to learn, and this is the way that I'm being called to this is what I want to
all
develop in
your
this next year. What do you think you can
80s,
develop? You know, like it's just the way we word it is so important. Yeah. Yeah. It's how you. I think it's if you posture and say I am not all there. This is what I'm doing because I realize my weaknesses. Yeah, and then you're like, hey, this is a map of, and then you show them like a thing like this,
Okay.
right? And you're like, this is where I'm weak at. I need to work on this. What do you think? Is there any area you think you can work on? All right, and then let them come up with it, not. then that always is more positive, right? So that's the remedial. The other part is brand new leaders. So let's say you have someone who's about to become a part of the parish council, or someone who's about to lead the children's ministry. Like, hey, before you get there, yeah.
Totally. It's kind of like almost like a double helix kind of a deal. You know, like DNA kind of a deal where you have two rungs. You know, one's discipleship, one's development. And I would say they're two sides of the same coin. I used to say development is just advanced discipleship, but that breaks down really quickly because people then what they hear is, oh, you're moving from character to competency, which is not at all the case. If you don't cultivate your character, you're going to have a short shelf life as a leader. You're going to get shot out of the saddle or whatever. So I stopped saying that, but I mean, really, it is two sides of the same coin, and we want to have a concentric growth, concentric learning, where it's like, hey, I have this much competency in grace, and then I got married. Now I have a greater.
Get your job done.
Then I have children. And then I
Yeah, I
really
think
have a different
it's. I mean, that's a question that we often get asked, especially as it relates to this. And I think part of it is let's take
all of
away
the
whether you're
deeper
paid or
skill.
not
Well, I
paid,
thought I understood
because
conflict.
motivation, and as it comes to motivation, there's extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Right? Extrinsic is I'm going to pay you, and that's why you're getting it done. Intrinsic is I
development,
really
leadership
just
development
love to
are-
cook. You know what I'm talking about? Like it's like I really just love to do this, and you get joy and you know satisfaction in just doing the task and being a part of that in ministry. So I think at each level, it's how do we then put the right people in the right places? Because I've had several individuals here, way like more capacity than my paid staff, but he was a farmer, and he was like, I sold my quota for milk. Like he still had his cows, but every church, you guys have the idea of the quota, the milk quota. Yeah. So he sold his quota, got a ton of money, and then he harvested and he planted his crops. So he said, hey, other than fall and spring, 1 month in each during harvest and rain, I'm yours. And this guy was like mid-30s. Brilliant man, brilliant. And he's like, I'll give you 30 hours a week.
It depends on
I was like,
where
hallelujah.
you're growing.
But he was definitely not here. He was definitely not here in all the levels. So I had to begin developing him.
Two parallel tracks.
What's the first step in that?
Almost. Because if you get one too far ahead of the other,
Yeah, it would be. Yeah,
in life
definitely.
and ministry,
Yeah, it would be. I guess you're kind of assessing where
our
his competencies
strengths
are.
in one area of
And
competency
I think when we
take us farther
truly
than
implement this,
our areas
then
of
you will
weakness and
likely
other
have a few
competencies
individuals in your congregation that have more
So
time. They want
guys
to give
get
more.
themselves in
They don't
trouble
want to be
where
paid
their strength in preaching
because they just love your church or they love
gets them farther than their strength.
being a part of that ministry.
So I have a great big church and then I crash it because I'm not emotionally healthy.
It would be together.
Crash it because I can't.
Yeah, it would be together. And then part of going that approach is then saying, hey, you may not be paid, but you're at the same level as this paid staff member. And if you're not paid, and that's one of the, and you really want to be a part of the ministry, and you're brought into those types of conversations with the paid staff members, then you begin destroying the laity priest, the divide. Yeah.
I actually think, if you go
Yeah.
employee, it's much easier, although you have to pay.
Right.
Putting staff on,
I would
Yeah.
work that into.
Yeah.
what you generally do
I mean,
is you
I
say,
still think
you've
it
got all
needs
the
to be
skills, you're now the ministry development.
Yeah.
You're in the ministry development role.
Yeah.
How much would you do that? How much would you say,
stated,
listen,
recorded,
we need to get
propagated
to
from
understand
somewhere.
people, we need
Yeah.
to get
And so,
confidence.
for
We're gonna bring
in
you
our
the leaders,
instance, it
we're
was
Yeah.
groups. So if
Yeah. I mean,
the
when
group
it comes
leader
to
has
hiring,
a checklist
I would always
they're gonna
prefer
work
an
through in every
internal
group.
hire than external
Yeah, they're
hire.
gonna take prayer
Right?
requests,
Internal hires are
standard
typically
thing that
if
do
you want to
there.
keep the
But we're
culture,
also
keep
gonna
the
talk about
systems.
who are,
External
like,
hires
who
will
are your
always shake
five,
things up
like, people
because
that
they're
you're
bringing
working
all
with
their
to
own.
train
There's no
them
way
to
you can
share the
assess
gospel.
and interview someone
Who did you talk to?
completely, right, before you hire them.
You know,
There's
I
always
mean,
going to be stuff you
I
just
think
don't
there's
know
ways that you
because
can
it's character and things
track
you just
that
don't
and
have
embed
time.
that in the
So
culture
you're right.
and
I would maybe they're at the ministry director level because functionally you need to
cadence of,
someone to lead the children's ministry.
mentioning it, you can
But
mention it
then
on
in
stage,
terms of giving
but when
them
you don't have a
decision-making
we
responsibilities,
don't have a job description
maybe
for
they're
being
more
a
on the
member of
tactical
church,
side than the strategic side
do
until they get it.
member, but not for being an attender.
Yeah.
So how do we get that embedded,
Yeah.
how do we formalize that? I don't know that you can formalize it, but I mean, keep
Yeah.
in mind,
Yeah.
informal drivers are often just as powerful as formal.
Yeah.
So like,
I mean,
if was
yeah.
gonna make a
I
major
would
change
always choose.
in our
I would say
ministry,
character is greater than chemistry is
there
greater
were
than
3
competency.
people,
Right?
one of
Because
them
I think
answered
with
the phone
competency
for
you
the
can always
church,
train,
volunteered,
but you can't
but I knew
change the
everyone
person's
would ask her what she
character.
thought, 'cause she'd
I mean,
been
that comes over time,
her family
right? And chemistry-wise, there's some people who just
had
you love to hang
informal
around with,
leadership.
and there are other people you're just like, I don't really like you, right? No matter how much time you spend with them, you're just like, we're just not going to ever be friends, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's why, in order, I would always choose character, look at character first,
And there was 2 others.
and
like
then
that as well,
chemistry, and
because
then
I knew they had
competency.
informal authority, they had informal
Yeah.
levers. You gotta, I mean, they exist in every
Yeah. Oh.
organization. And that's part of
Yeah.
emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and references too. I mean, references are useless.
You ever done
I
that?
mean, you're not going to put someone who's going to say something bad about you as your reference.
Self-awareness, self-management.
And then I don't know how it is here, but you
That
can't say
quadrant.
anything. If you're either reference for
that's a good
someone else, you
framework
can't really
too,
say
to sit
anything
down
bad
with
about
somebody
them,
that
or
you're
they can
developing, you
charge
go,
you for.
Hey,
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
screwed that up.
It's good. It's a good conversation, guys.
You may have
All right. Let's come back together and, hey, Derek. So, I just wanted to share a couple things here, a couple paradigms, thoughts that came up, and we'll have a little bit of time to talk about or answer some questions, and then we're going to get to another audit. All right. So when you look at decisions, decisions are the stuff of leadership, right? I mean, and the higher you get up, the more the onus of a decision is on you. And we are there's so many decisions that need to be made now, right? And it's just how do you empower your leaders? How do you empower individuals at every level to and train them and help them to make decisions, right? Because decisions are so important. So every decision, and here's a funnel. Every decision is either has strategic components and tactical components to it. And every decision, for example, do I want to start another service? Let's say you're meeting at 10:30 a.m. and you're overflowing, or you're kind of getting to that 80% rule, and you can seat 120 and you're at 100, or you're at 80, 90, and it just feels full. So the question is, do you start another service, or what do you do, right? Do you build a bigger, do you blast the wall out, or just what do you do to be able to support that growth? Well, in order to make that decision, there's a strategic side of that decision, and there's a tactical side of that decision, right? So let's say, here's the question. I'm 80% capacity at my one service. What are the strategic questions you're thinking about when that is your problem? Pardon me? Yes. So that's definitely a strategic question. Do I move to another site, or do I add another service? Very strategic, right? What else would be a strategic question that would need to be asked? Yeah, what kind of service is it going to be? Definitely. Because if your 1015 is a family service and you want to change the one to be another one, I mean, that's strategic. It's not just a simple question, right? So do you understand the importance of those strategic questions? And then you can say, do I even agree with the fact, do I even agree with the idea of having two services? Right? These are strategic sorts of questions you need to wrestle with. But then there's tactical. What would be some tactical oriented questions to this problem? Have I got the leaders? Definitely. Yeah, what else? Will my church grow? Yeah. So do you see how every decision, and some questions are a little bit in the middle, right? There's that gray area, but do you see how every decision has a strategic side and a tactical side? So this is a great and a simple framework to understand decision making. Now, as you're developing leaders at every level, you're training them to make decisions. Like, that is a competency there, right? And the higher someone moves up, you want to help them learn how to make decisions and to own it. So at the senior leader level, likely, if you are only operating at this level, likely you should be 80% strategic and 20% tactical, right? If you have a team around you and you have, whether it's volunteers or paid staff leading the children's ministry, the music ministry in this area and that, then you would want to empower these individuals to be, let's say, 60% strategic and 40% tactical, right? Do you see how that works? So you don't want to be 100% strategic. You probably have an idea as to what music should sound like and look like in your congregation, or with your music pastor, you probably want to be able to say, yes, I only want 2 songs. I don't want this to all of a sudden be 10 songs before the sermon, right? If you are, so you want to still be a part of that tactical, but here you want them to help you, right? And this is going to be maybe 40% strategic, 60% tactical. Maybe this is 20% strategic or 10% strategic, 80 or 90 tactical. And they're leading themselves. They're wholly and completely tactical. Now, the ratios I gave you aren't magical, or it's not like a silver bullet or anything like that, but it's an idea of how the ratios change as you move down. All right? Any thoughts on that? Questions? Is that clear? Yeah. Pardon me? Yeah, if the senior leader's not being strategic, then no one else. Or here's the other side. If the senior leader is highly tactical, then every ministry is going to make sure that they're just going to do whatever they want to do, and they're going to come up with their own strategy.
Can I say something real quickly? It's important to recognize, too, that up here, you need to be asking more questions than answering questions.
Yeah.
I need to be asking more questions and making decisions. Yes, I'm going to be making strategic decisions, absolutely, but my job is to ask as many questions as possible to make sure that we're getting to the right problem solving. So when somebody brings me a problem, I want to ask them questions to train them how to solve the problem on their own, so that in the future, like right now, I don't ever bring my boss a problem that I have not already solved, or at least have 2 possible solutions for. That's leading up. But I've been actually trained that way prior to working for them. And if I didn't do that, I would find myself in a big trouble. Why? Because he would solve my problems for me, and I don't want him to solve my problems for me at all. So
Yeah, because then you get to the tactics, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. All right, and that's likely. Unless anyone else had, okay, a couple more questions. Yeah, it's that division of strategic is more philosophical. Here are our values. This is the framework for making a decision, right? And the tactical is more of, okay, now how am I going to translate that to reality, right? So, for example, let's say you are wanting to preach a sermon series on giving, right? Let's say, so you're saying, hey, so the strategic question that you'd be asking is how long, or not even how long, it's why should I do this or should I not? What passage should I be preaching out of if it's 6 weeks long or 2 weeks long? And then the tactical nature of that would then be, what are we then going to add on to the sermons? Are we going to have Bible studies that go along with it? Is everyone going to get a book with it? It's more the support. But strategic is that big picture. Tactical is boots on the ground, sort of.
You mentioned the ratio of 80-20
Yeah.
senior ministers. What's been your experience in reality in the churches you've worked with in the States?
Yeah, so it goes to Todd's question, or Todd's comment here, is the senior leaders who are really good at staying in strategic are the ones that may have an opinion, but they're asking their ministry directors, okay, what do you think about this? Right? Because often
You'll train them to do that over
Yeah.
the course of time. I mean, they won't keep bringing you the problems to solve. I mean, ultimately you would be the bottleneck in that. Hey, and here's what happens again over the course of time. This comes back to a culture issue, guys. If when somebody does something dumb, if we put a policy in place or a new procedure or a new check or balance in place, it actually does the opposite of what we want it to do. It actually trains people in the wrong direction. We want savvy people, not savvy policies. And the only way to do that is to kind of, begin to push back and walk them through. The only way you reproduce yourself is by doing that. Is by helping them see and helping them grow, not solve the problem yourself. I mean, in a real way, our fruit grows on other people's trees. And by that I mean it's not our job to solve everything and do everything. And my legacy is this guy. I mean, he's 10 years younger than I am. My addition to that, there's another guy on our team that's 10 years younger than that. If I do my job well, they will be light years better than I mean, they will make a tremendously more impact to the kingdom. My impact for the kingdom will not likely be my goal in life is for my impact not to be something I do, but someone I develop. And it's important for us to understand that and buy into that as leaders. I mean, that's what leadership is. Anybody heard of Henrietta Mears?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody heard of Billy Graham? Anybody heard of Bill Bright? Anybody heard of Navigators? Help me out.
Mr. Navigator.
Mr. Navigators. I can't remember his name. Okay, so all this is a point, and there's a couple more examples. There was a lady named Henrietta Mears. Oh, and Ronald Reagan, by the way. All these gentlemen came up through her Sunday school class.
That's crazy.
It's insane.
Yeah, that
And
is.
why we have not heard of Henrietta Mears, I do not know. But one of my favorite quotes in the world is one that she had, which is, people are not vessels to be filled, but torches to be lit. And sorry I deviated from that a little bit, but that's the whole idea of when we think about people development and we think about pushing the strategy up and the tactical down, and we think about how we're developing people, it really is through that iterative process, and it is personal, and it is slightly more difficult, and it seems like it's more time consuming. But it's far, far more effective over the course of time.
When you just said torches to be lit in my Bible reading this morning, I'm in Judges, and I just read Samson. That story of him torching the foxes. Anyways, it's fun.
I was scared you were going to go a little too Holy Spirit for this group there, but you didn't. I appreciate that.
No. All right. So here's another way to explain it. All right. This is a. That's funny. Here's another way to explain it. Every church, every one of our churches here, and this is a good good illustration of all of churches in general. Every one of our churches we all have a vision, right? And all of our visions it's a contextualized version of the Great Commission and Great Commandment, right? If you're a Bible-believing, gospel preaching evangelical church, I mean, the vision is, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, love the Lord, right? So it's this vision here that we all have. Now, the way we word it, it's all going to be different, right? And that's fine, but it's really, all our visions are up there. It's that golden tomorrow. The way we get to our vision is strategy, right? So this is kind of like where we want to go. The strategy is what we're doing to get to our vision. Now, here's a framework. When you think of every single thing that your church does, and you probably had an idea of it when you wrote down in the audit, all the job descriptions or all the roles and all the areas, you're thinking, oh, I got children's ministry, I got men's ministry, I got this, I got pastoral care, I got this, and you have all these things that need to be done, and you're like, well, that's a strategy, right? I mean, that's what we're doing to accomplish the Great Commission. And I mean, yes, that's true, but let's think higher up, right? Let's not think 10 meters above. Let's think 10,000 meters, right? Or 50,000 meters up in the sky. And if you look at everything that you do, the strategy that you do, it's always a mix between a discipleship pathway and a leadership pipeline, right? Everything that a church does can fall under your leadership pipeline or your discipleship pathway, because your discipleship pathway is you maturing, you helping individuals mature, and leadership pipeline is the equipping of the saints. So when I did my systematic theology class in seminary, J.I. Packer was the professor, and he talked about this. It's like I still remember, right? In addition to him singing the doxology at the beginning of every class, and it was just a great accent, that English accent. He also said, hey, in your journey towards maturity in Christ, I mean, Eugene Peterson says, discipleship is a long obedience in the same direction, if you've read that book. Packer said, hey, in your journey in drawing closer to Christ or in knowing God, you're going to hit Christology, pneumatology, ecclesiology, soteriology. You're going to get through all of these, and then the next time you get to Christology, it's going to be a little different, right? Because everything else feeds into it, right? And even when you feel like you got to the top, you break through, and you're like, oh, everything is just continuing to feed into one another in that way. And in the same way, when we look at discipleship, when we look at drawing closer to Christ, growing in our love for him, bringing glory to him, I mean, it's this idea of, okay, let's mature people, but then leadership pipeline is how do we then support that growth and equip the saints for the work of ministry. It's Matthew 9:30, the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. How are you going to train more harvest workers? And it's the pipeline that will support this. Now, that's strategy, right? Getting to our vision. Values is what differentiates your church from the one down the road. Right? Because every church needs to disciple. Every church needs to equip leaders for the work of ministry. We all need to do this. I'm talking about, evangelical, Bible-believing churches. But the values are going to change the way you do it from the one down the road. So, for example, I'm a bivocational teaching pastor at my church. The unique value that I have at our church is this value of roundtable leadership. So at every level of the pipeline, there's not one person in charge, but there's a round table of leaders. And that's just a decision that the elders made, where one person can't unilaterally make the decisions at all levels. I'm not saying that that's the way you got to do it, just saying that's what we decided to do. Right? And when it comes to community life, well, how are you going to do community life? Is it these groups or that groups? That's the values that you have in your church are what's going to differentiate. I mean, this is how you do what you need to do to get to where you need to go. Right? So I'm going to hand it over to Todd, and he's going to lead us into another audit.
Good deal. So at the end of the day, what we're beginning to wind down on is understanding where the leaders are in the different levels of our organization. So if you turn to page 14, we want to do this. What we're trying to do here is pick an area of ministry. If you're here and you're a children's minister or you have a specific area of ministry, then go ahead and do this on your ministry. If you're a senior pastor or assistant pastor, go ahead and you guys do that on your church. ignore the directions up here because having talked to you guys, I want to give you two scenarios that everybody could kind of work through. We're going to look at the different levels of our pipeline and talk about how many we have currently versus how many we need. And then I would say go ahead and sneak in a third column there and say how many do we have, how many we need currently. Sneak in a third column and say how many would I need to start a second service, not a second service, a second location, or another service, another congregation. I think each service is a congregation, is that right? In most cases? Okay. So either starting another congregation on site or one off site. So pick one of those scenarios and work out how many you currently have and currently need. And then if you grew and you started another congregation on site or off site, what would that look like? Understand? Good deal. So take a few moments and kind of begin to look at that and put those and then we'll see what kind of ratios we have as we move forward. Daniel and I again will walk around for any questions you might have. Ultimately, I'd love for you to do the whole thing, but yeah, but you can do that for this exercise. Ultimately, I would say you need to go back and do the whole thing. to give you about 5 more minutes. I know this one is fairly complicated to figure out, so going to give you about 5 more minutes to do this one.
What are you drinking? Black tea. Have you ever had white tea?
That's an interesting exercise. Just giving this thought, but it's actually impossible.
Are you the senior minister in your
Yeah,
congregation?
we've got 10 congregations.
Oh,
I can't
okay.
work out
Yeah,
how
yeah,
many
yeah.
leaders we've
Yeah.
got.
So what we, I mean, we do this. What we're doing now is kind of level 1 with a lot of different churches, and
Yeah.
it's the senior minister coming. We did a level 2 pipeline thing with Rudy Hill and being Rudy Hill, where it was just their staff.
Right.
So in that sort of context, it's we have the children's team sitting there, this team, service teams.
I tell you what, though, one of the differences.
See, I've already done that exercise for our church.
Down through the first
Yeah.
4 levels.
There is in the fridge. We can pop around.
Congregational ministry versus portfolio.
Yes.
So as soon as I come down to that centre level, I've got congregational leaders, and we can't get out of that. We can't go directly to portfolio because it's just too complicated with the facilities we've got using them.
No, I'm okay.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Our facilities don't enable us to grow a large enough congregation to make the jump to portfolio.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have to be congregational for the moment until we get ourselves.
Yeah.
But as soon as we get that coaching,
Yeah.
so you obviously have a coach across all the youth districts. But at the moment, it's split up congregation.
Yeah. So it does. You're right. It does require a different structure, right? And it does require a different type of staffing,
Yeah.
right? So it's hard to. I mean, every level, the size of a church and complexity of the church. I mean, it requires a different type of structure for staffing. But that's just kind of supporting the growth for it, right? So I mean, sometimes
We work with all of them.
Okay.
We've got 4 different ministries.
Okay. Okay.
English congregation, we've got a Chinese congregation, I've got Persian congregation, and the Chinese was Cantonese.
Okay. So then you work with all the congregational leaders?
Yeah, I work with all the congregations. Well, I work, we've got language leaders,
Okay. Yeah.
and then they work at the level of congregation. So those are the kinds of,
Yeah. So what we would do in that context would be, so we put the 4 English congregational leaders together and language and take 2 tables. And then if you had any other leaders over maybe more of a focused area or whatnot, or leaders under them, they'd be in another table, and we would help them discern this together. Because you couldn't, I mean, there's no way you could come up with the numbers all by yourself. Because you're in the strategic, you're not in the tactics of all that. So then, what we would then do is after they all do that, then you'd come together and be like, hey, if our goal is to do this, what do we all need to move towards? And then you at your highest level would then see, you're looking at, 50,000 meters, high above the sky. Okay, look at the weaknesses we then have.
we're in the process right now, going to our city council,
1 minute warning.
Oh, okay.
which, I'm working strategically, philosophically, how we want to do. But I can see really easily where the weaknesses is, but it's going to get the tactical
Yeah.
realistic.
Yeah. I mean, we had one church that we did this with. They were one service, right? This was the first church we worked with here in Australia.
Okay, should be wrapping up.
That is, I mean, that's what's needed. I mean, because there's a lot of, that's the problem immigrant churches are working through.
Yeah.
The second generation. You know,
We've actually got it working.
that's awesome.
I'm loving seeing
That's
that.
awesome.
So we've got the second generation. We're up to, we're up to the young workers that are coming through in that second generation. And it's exciting to see. So there's a very clear yeah, moving to a different premises. So that
All right.
move to a portfolio style management because
Let's get back in. Okay, I need a volunteer who's kind of got theirs kind of written down. Nobody, everybody's scared. Nothing. Jody. You're all pointing to Jody. All right, let's go. All right, come on up. I wish we had a wheel for you to spin. We don't have a wheel, unfortunately. All right. So, I'm actually going to go through here and do one more section of have a need. Okay, so are you, did your scenario go, we're going to start a new congregation on-site or off-site? On-site. Okay, so this is have, this is need, current, and then this is need new. All right, let's go. Let's go from. Actually, let's go from the bottom up. What you got on have and need across?
I've kind of got 6 levels. Because what I've done is I've put senior minister at the top, community 1 and E. So they're kind of
Okay.
sort of at the top.
All right.
But I've sort of got ministers, so they're sort of
When did you find?
paid staff.
Okay.
Coordinators who coordinate areas of ministry. So it's kind of like
Okay.
I know. I mean,
this is from the top, but that's what I'm worried about.
Right. So how are you? Okay. So if we went back and we were doing this,
I just don't.
the big question for me would be, how are you defining these levels?
Yeah.
So it would be, hey, what's the difference between a leader and a coordinator? Is a leader just leading a ministry and a coordinator is leading leaders?
Yeah, certainly in our kind of little churches, it's very much it's been a fairly organic sort of thing. That if someone comes along
Right.
a few weeks,
Yeah.
they kind of evolve into a member and they're finally doing something.
Right.
And then a volunteer would be a position that's a little bit more defined in that role,
Right.
maybe on a roster or something like that.
Okay.
And then a leader would be coordinating that area of ministry. Well, sorry, would be a more engaged person in that ministry.
I'll tell you what, for the sake of this exercise, and I would say, so again, from a size perspective and a complication perspective of an organization, I mean, Saddleback would fit into the 5, like in processing this with them, working through, going through the day. They got theirs into 5. So a lot of times we'll sit down with a large church and they'll have a huge children's ministry. And the children's ministry will say, well, we have 9 alone. And I will say, no, you don't. You may have leaders of leaders of leaders. You may have 3 or 4 levels within leaders of leaders. However, it's not necessary to add another layer up, because that does add complexity. What we're trying to get to is simplicity. So for the sake of this, can we just put, can we squeeze your top 2 in?
Yep, for sure.
Okay.
And probably the bottom 2.
Okay. Bottom two and top two?
Yep.
All right, we can, I'm fine with keeping your bottom two in, but let's explain them as we go. Okay, so we have, let's start at the top then, since we want to start at the top. So we have 3 senior leaders, or no, we have 1 senior leader and 2 ministry directors. Tell me which it is.
I would say that we have the ministry directors are probably lay leaders.
Okay,
So the senior minister, a full-time assistant minister in one parish, and a part-time assistant minister in another parish. So it's kind of
okay,
like I run 2 parishes.
right,
Think of them sort of, for the sake of this argument, as a multi-centre
okay.
arrangement.
So then that would be how many at the top?
So 1 senior minister and 2 assistant ministers.
Okay,
So 3.
all right, we got 3 at the top. Ministry directors. Oh, we can go across.
We can go across
And so right now, are we saying
4 and then 5, I reckon.
4? Why do you currently need 4 at the top?
Would like a specialist minister to youth and children.
Okay, would that be here or would that be here? This is
Maybe.
directing a ministry.
Yeah.
So I would put those guys, I would put that person down here. So I would say, hey, I need this down here. Now, if
Yeah.
almost anybody was up here, we'd be doing the same thing. So don't feel weird.
No.
So is it still? It's still 3. His table pushed him into this, by the way. All right, so needed new is now,
Jody, just use the mic. We can't hear you.
Okay.
so is this 4?
Yes, let's put that
Okay, that's definitely 4. All right, now let's go across directing ministries. So this is okay where, I mean, you know, again, my dad's church is 100. He's gonna have maybe 1 or 2 directors. He's gonna have children's and he's gonna have Sunday school director
Yeah.
in his particular instance.
Yeah.
So even there, he's got 2. So they don't have to be paid staff or anything like that. So let's go across.
When we have a combined leaders meeting 4 times a year where I get together all the key people who are doing things that are strategic in some sense,
Right.
and across the 2 parishes there would be 25 people.
Okay,
Now that's probably not going to fit.
that's a couple levels.
That's probably a couple of levels.
Yes.
Not all 25 of them are making the
So
same
just
strategic decisions.
Just tell me the people that are leading a ministry. So like children's, students, or if you
Yeah.
put your 5 M's, if you say, nope, I
No.
just have 5 M's.
Well, I would probably say 12 people.
12 people?
And that would be somebody whose role it is to be the children's minister of
Like
one of
early
the
child-
parishes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how many do you need though?
Well, I think we've got enough,
Oh,
but they
good.
probably need to be developed, I think.
All right,
And
and then how many will you need if you do another one?
I would say another 4. So
Another
let's
4.
say 16.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next level. Leaders of leaders. What do you got here? I see what you've got on your paper.
Yeah, I know.
You
I'm
seem-
trying
you
to.
s- You seem a little,
Yeah, it's redefining what I've got here based on what we're doing
Okay.
there. I mean, in some ways, I would see these 2 being together because these
Okay.
12 people would be leading their own teams of a few volunteers that are
right,
kind of
well then
so
they
that
would technically be leaders of leaders
they probably would be there.
rather than here. It
And
could be
in
though,
some ways,
in your
it's sort of
model.
almost down here. Like there's almost
It could
one.
be in your
two.
model, though, that you don't have a coaching layer. You
Yeah.
just have a director layer and a leader layer.
That's probably more. what it
Because
would
we'll
be.
do this with some churches, and their staff is actually functioning here or even here.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they're paying people to be leaders at
Yeah.
that point.
Yep.
And that happens a lot in the South, where you have churches who've rapidly grown and have lots of money. They just go ahead and buy them.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think probably, in a sense, I would almost move these
Okay,
down
we can do that.
a little bit, I'd say. So what if
So
you
we can do one,
Yep.
and do. Is this still 1?
Yeah.
Okay, 1, and then it
Yep.
moves to, we're moving this down 12.
Yep.
Okay, now
Yep.
we're getting somewhere.
Yep.
And this is 3? 3, 3,
Yeah.
and 4?
Yep. Now, I would probably say that there are some people on this level who are functioning up there as well, because they're the paid staff, and there'll be some very
Right,
key
well,
people. But for the time being, this
It's
is
not, it doesn't, it's just, are they leading leaders or are they leading a ministry? And so that's the real question there.
Yep.
So if they're leading a ministry, let's leave them up there.
Yep.
How about right here?
Well, I reckon I had probably 20.
Okay. How many do you need?
Where did I put 30?
Okay.
And then I put 40 in the next column.
40 in the next column. All right, and down at the bottom.
Well, basically anybody who turns up and has been coming for a month or two suddenly find themselves on a roster doing something, whether it's
Okay.
cleaning up or whatever. That's the way we kind of fly. So I put down 40, 60, 80, kind of
Okay.
invented numbers, but
All right. Well, okay. So, all right, let's process this a little bit. Okay, so from a research perspective, and by the way, most of the time when I'm doing this, there are really lopsided ratios. Like 2 weeks ago, I was doing this, and I had a women's ministry director who had 76 leaders with no coaching, no leader of leaders in between. It was her, and then she had 38 Bible study leaders. She had another, I think 12 no, MOPS. Like 26 MOPS leaders. Mothers of preschoolers is a big thing. And then she had like T people and a couple other people that were like leading a team. And so she found that she was dipping down here. Now, I will say this as well. Sandy, who is a phenomenal leader in every way, shape, and form, who runs the children's ministry here, she was good to go in every area except for one, and that was her equipping ministry. And she said, what this has helped me realize is I'm dipping down all the way down into these 2 levels in this particular area. Equipping was the people that were assembling some things during the week. They were putting together the things for Sunday morning and making sure the leaders had their stuff. So that was a new thing that is absolutely phenomenal, because that means there's so many leaders that, are equipped and working, and it's being really well taken care of. But doing an audit like this revealed, okay, my ratios are off there, or I'm dipping all the way back down, or a staff person is dipping all the way back down to the bottom to recruit and develop this person or interact with this person on a daily, weekly basis sometimes.
rather than going down
Right,
leading a
right,
leader
yeah,
who
yeah.
leads and equips.
So from a research perspective, you can only have a meaningful relationship with about 7 people. Some people can do more than that, but not many. I mean, even the best can do like 10. So the ideal situation there is to say, hey, when we look at span of care, when you look at the 3, the 12s, I mean, you don't want to extrapolate too much from that. But I would say it's still a good, at least, guideline. I wouldn't say, causations versus correlation. I think there's correlation there. I'm not saying that we should extrapolate that and use those exact numbers. But when research and the Bible connect, I think it's probably a pretty good correlation that that's the case. So when you think about this, and likely in your numbers, you had some differences here. So in this scenario, his ratios look too good to be true, actually. If you have 20 people and 40 people, that's 1 person for every 2 people, then I'd say they don't need to lead. They're a volunteer.
Yeah.
And so I would collapse, and you, to your credit, you told me to collapse these 2, and I didn't pay attention to you. I'm sorry. So what more likely it looks like is something like 60, 90, 120. And in that case, it's like 1 to 5. You see what I'm saying? 1 to 6 or 7 right there, and it's only here where you get in trouble where you're looking at new. So this is a really important exercise for you to be able to do and to see your ratios for what you have and what you need. It's something that will be done, one ministry area may be great, another one needs some help. But when you do this, you have a much better idea of how we're going to get there. If strategically we've made the decision to move to another campus, this will help us toward that end. I'll have Daniel come up now, and actually, before he comes up, I do want to walk us through the competency overview on page 14. When we look at leadership pipeline, 15. When we look at leadership pipeline, just know that we spent 3 years developing all of this, that we didn't do it on our own. I hope you know by the number of books and people we've referenced today that we owe a lot to others. And also that, again, we didn't do this on our own. There's a great deal of research that went in, a great deal of time, effort, energy that went in. So once we established what levels we wanted in our pipeline, I then sent out to 15 different people. That would be Brad Lomenick, who started Catalyst, if you've ever heard of Catalyst, a guy named Mac Lake, a guy named Will Mancini, the former director of Walmart International for HR, is now an executive pastor, believe it or not, and he, weighed in addition to some other executive pastors, and then two different denominational leaders. But what I did was, blind from everybody else, I sent them the levels, and I said, hey, what competencies would you say every volunteer in every church needs, regardless of the size of the church? What competencies do you think they need? And so we gathered all, and I did mine, of course, too, and we gathered all those back together, and for the next 18 months, we began to process what those were. So they not only told me the competency, but they gave me, a brief description of what they thought that was. We took those together. There were 287 of those things. And the second time we met is when it clicked, and we realized, hey, a lot of these things are overlapping. What if because, everybody was talking about conflict management in one way, shape, or form. Well, what does that look like? Well, what if we can develop 6 different categories that encapsulate a lot of these competencies that will, shore everything up? And so what we did was we found the 6 that are listed there across on the top of page 15. Discipleship, vision, strategy, collaboration, people development, and stewardship. Those are the core competencies. And then role-based competencies, of course, are, to the individual area. So in this regard, we would say, hey, every church needs a pipeline of core competencies and levels that they all agree on, language that they all agree on. But every person needs a pathway. Every individual is, of course, on their own journey and serving in the way that Christ has called them, and that is specialized, ministry role. So with all that being said, if you look at the discipleship competency as an example, and you go, okay, at the bottom level there, volunteer. Let me look at the leader's responsibility. How are we defining that? Well, we're saying they serve on a ministry team. And then we say, here's some sample roles so everybody knows what we're talking about. And then how are we defining what discipleship, what competency looks like for a volunteer? Remember, this is almost the cornerstone foundational thing here. This is discipleship, and at a volunteer level, we want them to know the gospel and take responsibility for their own personal development, which looks a lot like spiritual disciplines. But we want to make sure that that's the case for all of our volunteers. Now, for you, at your individual church, what that would look like would be, okay, how are we defining this level? Is it volunteer? Is it team member? And then how are we defining it? Is it serves on a ministry team, or like how are we defining that role? And then finally, what are some examples so everybody, everything that we're trying to do is provide clarity. When we double click on that discipleship at the volunteer level, what you would see is 5 different learning objectives at that level. So I had Paul Tripp come in and do discipleship from tip to tail, that whole vertical. So he does 5 sessions at the volunteer level, helping volunteers know the gospel and take responsibility for their development. Then he moves up into the leader level, knows basic doctrines and practice of spiritual disciplines, and exhibits the fruit of the Spirit. What does that look like? On up until the highest level of teaching theology and serving as a Christ-like example. Paul Tripp does not teach theology in this video. This training session. Our training sessions are more, training is more than video-based learning. I hope you understand we're not trying to digitize development. This is just a framework to help you run off of. Remember, knowledge, experience, coaching. I'm a result of good and godly people in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, who couldn't have asked me a good coaching question to save their life. But there were good and godly people that had a scope and a sequence. They were more mature than I was, and they cared enough about me to have that conversation. That conversation was developed in such a way that it led to transformation. If I broke down knowledge, experience, and coaching for you, it would look a little something like this. I would be taking you through general implication. So what are the facts and feelings about this situation? If this sounds familiar, it's really common, unfortunately not as common as it should be, in curriculum, in Bible curriculum, Bible training. I'm looking for the general implication, and then what's the personal implication? So what are the general facts and feelings, and then what about me? And then what about how do I apply this to my life? How do I implement this? How do I actualize this and get feedback on it? That is the